Somewhere tonight, in the quiet of your own mind, there is a story running about your life. A story that says the delay you are facing, the closed door you keep knocking upon, the disappointment that arrived when you expected good news, are proof that something has gone wrong, that the universe has turned against you, or worse, has simply forgotten you entirely. I want to sit with you tonight and gently take that story apart, thread by thread, because I promise you, from decades of watching this law unfold in my own life and in the lives of countless others who came to me with the very same fear you carry now, that story you have been telling yourself is not true, not one word of it. And when you finally see what has actually been happening beneath the surface of your circumstances, you will never again mistake a closed door for an abandoned soul. Let us begin gently, because tonight is not a night for straining or forcing anything, but a night for settling in. The way you settle into a chair at the end of a long day, releasing the weight from your shoulders, allowing your breath to slow, allowing the noise of the day to grow distant, the way sound grows distant when you step from a busy street into a quiet garden enclosed by high stone walls. I want you, as you listen, to let your body soften, to unclench whatever you have been unconsciously holding tight, your jaw, your hands, your stomach, and to simply rest here with me for a while. Because what I am about to share with you is not meant to be understood only with the thinking mind. It is meant to be felt, absorbed the way warmth is absorbed by skin held near a fire, without any effort at all beyond simply staying close enough to receive it. I want to tell you about a young man in an old and often repeated story, sold by his own brothers into a foreign land, stripped of his home, his family, his very name among strangers, and cast into hardship after hardship, a prisoner in a house not his own, forgotten, it seemed, by everyone who might have helped him. If you had stood beside him in that pit before he was sold, or in that prison cell years later, and told him that every single one of these events was working, quietly and precisely, toward his eventual rise to a position of such authority that he would one day hold the very fate of his brothers in his hands, and would meet them not with vengeance, but with the calm and settled words that what they intended for harm had been turned, all along, toward good, he would not have believed you. No one in the midst of the pit ever believes such a thing. And yet this is the story, and I want you to understand tonight that it is not simply an ancient tale meant to comfort a discouraged people long ago. It is a description of how consciousness itself operates in every single life, including yours, this very night. I do not tell you this so that you resign yourself to hardship as some necessary and unavoidable path toward eventual good. I tell you this because I want you to consider seriously the possibility that what looks, from where you now stand, like abandonment, like failure, like a universe indifferent to your well-being, might in truth be the very same law, the very same faithful and exact consciousness, quietly working behind the visible curtain of your present circumstance, toward an outcome you cannot yet perceive, precisely because you have not yet assumed it. And this, my friends, is the heart of everything I want to share with you tonight. Not that hardship is secretly good in itself, but that consciousness, your consciousness, is always and without exception working, this very moment, toward whatever state you have assumed, whether that assumption was made deliberately, in full awareness, or carelessly, through years of unexamined habit. Let us come now to the deepest foundation beneath everything else I will say tonight, so that all that follows rests upon solid and settled ground rather than upon mere hopeful words. Imagination is not an idle faculty, tucked away in some unused corner of your mind, useful only for entertainment or escape. Imagination is the very creative power by which all things take their first and truest shape, long before they ever appear to the outer eye. Consciousness is the only reality there has ever been, the ocean from which every wave of circumstance eventually rises, and feeling, quiet, steady feeling, is the secret current that determines which wave will rise and which will recede back into stillness. When I ask you tonight to assume that everything is working for you, I am not asking you to recite a comforting phrase while your body remains braced for disaster. I am asking you to shift the very feeling from which you meet each day, so that the current beneath your circumstances begins, gently and steadily, to carry you toward shores you have not yet seen but have already in feeling arrived upon. I want you to imagine for a moment a wide and ancient river, moving toward the sea with a patience that no single obstacle along its course can ultimately defeat. A boulder falls into its path, and the river does not halt, does not argue, does not waste itself in frustration against the stone. It simply continues moving, and in time the water finds its way around the obstacle, or beneath it, or in some cases over long years, wears the very stone down until it is no longer an obstacle at all, but simply another smooth and rounded part of the riverbed itself. This is the nature of consciousness assumed with quiet confidence. It is not that obstacles never appear along your path. They will appear, as surely as boulders appear in the path of any river. But when you assume, deeply and persistently, that everything is working for you, you become like that patient river, moving steadily onward, trusting the current beneath you, rather than exhausting yourself in battle against every stone that happens to lie in your way. I want to ask you something now, gently, and I want you to answer honestly within yourself, rather than for my benefit. When difficulty arrives in your life, what is the very first assumption that rises within you, almost before you have had time to think? Is it, "This is happening to me, this proves my bad luck, this confirms that I am the kind of person for whom things go wrong"? Or have you begun, even in some small and tentative way, to meet difficulty with a different inner voice, one that says quietly, "This too is being used, this too is part of a larger movement I cannot yet see the whole of, and I choose even now to trust the current beneath it"? The difference between these two inner responses does not merely change how you feel in the moment, though that alone would be worth everything. It changes what you are assuming, and what you assume, my friends, is what you are quietly and continuously calling forth from the vast and obedient depths of consciousness itself. Let me tell you of the mirror once more, though I want to show it to you tonight in a way you may not have considered before. You know, of course, that a mirror reflects back whatever expression you present to it. But consider what happens when clouds pass between the sun and a still lake. The lake does not stop reflecting, simply because the light has temporarily dimmed. It continues faithfully to mirror whatever light does reach its surface, and the moment the clouds part again, the lake reflects the returning brightness with the very same faithful obedience it showed toward the temporary dimness. Your circumstances are such a lake, my friends, and difficulty, when it arrives, is often nothing more than a passing cloud, not a permanent alteration of the sun itself. The temptation, in the midst of such a cloud, is to assume that the sun has vanished forever, that the darkness is now the fixed and final truth of your life. But I tell you, the sun remains, whole and undiminished, behind every cloud that has ever passed across your sky. And your task, in the midst of apparent difficulty, is not to curse the temporary shadow, but to remember with quiet and settled faith the sun you cannot presently see. This brings me to what I have called living in the end, and I want to describe it to you tonight, not as a technique to be performed, but as a place of rest you are invited to enter. The way a weary traveler is invited to finally sit down after a long day upon the road. To live in the end is to stop standing anxiously at the beginning of your story, wondering and calculating whether good will ever arrive, and instead to settle gently into the felt reality of its arrival, resting there the way you might rest in a garden you already know to be your own, rather than standing outside its gate, hoping someday to be admitted. When you assume that everything is working for you, you are, in truth, choosing to live already in the end of a story whose final chapter reads as triumph, reconciliation, and abundance. Regardless of what the middle chapters, the ones you are currently living through, may presently show upon their surface. I want to offer you, now, a way to practice this tonight, not as a separate exercise set apart from the rest of your evening, but as a natural continuation of the very rest I invited you into at the beginning of our time together. As you allow your body to soften further and your breath to grow slower and deeper, I want you to imagine yourself looking back upon this present season of your life from some future vantage point, a time when the difficulty you now carry has long since resolved into a clarity you could not have possessed while still standing in its midst. From that future place, looking back, you can see how each apparently painful delay was in truth clearing space for something better suited to you than what you had originally hoped for. You can see how a door that seemed cruelly shut in your face was, in truth, protecting you from a room that would have brought you far greater sorrow than the temporary sting of its closing. Feel this vantage point now, not as wishful thinking, but as a settled and calm remembering, the way you might recall an old worry from years past that at the time felt unbearable and now barely stirs a ripple of concern, because time itself revealed what your fearful mind, in the moment, could not yet perceive. I want you to notice as you rest in this feeling how your body responds. Perhaps your shoulders drop a little further, perhaps your breath deepens, without any conscious effort on your part. This bodily ease is not incidental. It is in fact the very evidence that a new assumption is beginning to settle into place. For feeling, as I have said many times, is the secret language your subconscious understands far more fluently than any words you could speak. A body that has assumed everything is working for, you cannot help but soften, the way a traveler's shoulders soften, the moment he finally recognizes the road he has been anxiously searching for. Now, I must speak honestly of what happens next, because I do not want to leave you unprepared for the return of doubt which will surely come, as it comes to every person who dares to assume something contrary to the evidence still visible before their eyes. You will feel this ease tonight, and perhaps tomorrow morning some circumstance will arise, some delay, some unkind word, some bill or ache or disappointment, that seems to argue loudly against everything I have shared with you. This is the moment that determines everything, and I want you to understand it clearly, because it is here that persistence in assumption becomes not a mere suggestion, but the very heart of this entire practice. The old channel of doubt, worn deep by years of habitual dwelling, does not vanish overnight, simply because you have spent 20 minutes assuming otherwise. It remains, faint but present, ready to reassert itself the moment your attention grows careless. Think of a mountain path, worn smooth over generations by the careful footsteps of travelers who came before you. A path so deeply grooved into the mountainside that even in darkness, feet find their way along it, almost without conscious guidance. Beside this old path you have begun tonight to walk a new and less familiar way, one that leads not toward the fearful valley of assumed misfortune, but toward the sunlit ridge of assumed good. This new path will feel less certain beneath your feet for a time, simply because it has not yet been walked as often as the old one. But I tell you, every single time you choose, deliberately and calmly, to walk this new path rather than slipping back into the old and familiar groove, the new path deepens, and the old path, deprived of your attention, slowly begins to grow over with disuse, the way any path untraveled eventually fades back into the surrounding wilderness. I want to speak now of the state akin to sleep, for it is here, in this precious threshold, just before sleep fully claims you, that the deepest work of assumption takes place, far more powerfully than in the busy and argumentative hours of daylight. You know this threshold well, that drowsy hush, in which the analytical mind, so quick during the day to interrogate every suggestion, finally grows quiet, the way a courtroom grows silent once the arguments have ended, and only a patient waiting for the verdict remains. In this hush, I ask you, as you drift tonight towards sleep, to hold gently in your awareness the simple, settled feeling that everything occurring in your life at this moment, however it may appear upon the surface, is being woven, thread by careful thread, into a pattern whose final beauty you have simply not yet been given eyes to see. Let this feeling be the last impression carried across the threshold into sleep, for what is impressed here sinks far deeper than anything achieved through daytime effort and argument, precisely because the analytical watchman has, for these precious moments, finally laid down his sword. I think often of the great weaver working at her loom, viewed from beneath, where the observer sees only a tangle of knots and crossed threads, an apparent chaos with no discernible pattern, no evident purpose, simply confusion upon confusion. But viewed from above, from the weaver's own vantage point, the very same threads reveal an intricate and deliberate design, each knot placed with purpose, each crossing thread essential to the emerging picture. You have been, for much of your life perhaps, viewing your own circumstances from beneath the loom, seeing only tangled knots, unable to perceive the pattern your own consciousness has been weaving all along. Tonight, I invite you to imagine yourself rising, in feeling, to the weaver's own vantage point, looking down upon the very same threads that once seemed so chaotic, and trusting with quiet and settled faith that a pattern is indeed forming, even in threads you cannot yet fully trace. This trust, this settled confidence in an unseen pattern, is precisely what I mean by faith, and I want to be clear that faith, properly understood, has nothing to do with denying the difficulty you presently see. It has everything to do with refusing to mistake that difficulty for the final and complete truth of your situation. Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen, and I want you to notice how practical this definition truly is. It does not say faith is the denial of things seen. It says faith is the evidence of things not yet seen, a felt conviction concerning a pattern still forming, still weaving, still traveling unseen through the deeper dimensions of consciousness before it ever arrives, fully formed, into the visible world of your outer experience. I want to speak now of your self-concept, because I think this is where so many people unknowingly sabotage the very assumption I am inviting you to make tonight. If somewhere beneath your conscious awareness, you have long believed yourself to be a person for whom things generally go wrong, a person who must brace habitually for disappointment, then no matter how sincerely you assume, for 20 minutes this evening, that everything is working for you, that deeper and more habitual self-concept will continue, quietly and persistently, to pull your attention back toward the old and familiar story of misfortune. I ask you then to examine this deeper foundation honestly. Do you believe yourself to be someone the universe conspires against, or someone the universe conspires for? This is not a question to be answered quickly through forced positivity, but one to be lived with quietly, watching your own private reactions to small events over the coming days. The way a careful gardener watches the changing weather over an entire season rather than judging the whole year by a single passing storm. And here, revision offers you a nightly opportunity to gently correct this deeper foundation. At the close of each day, before you enter the drowsy threshold of sleep, I ask you to review the events that troubled you, and wherever you responded from the old assumption of misfortune, wherever you concluded too quickly that some difficulty was proof of a universe working against you, revise that moment. See it again. But this time, see yourself meeting that same difficulty with the settled trust of one who assumes, without exception, that even this is somehow being used for good, even if the shape of that good remains, for now, invisible to you. This revision is not a denial of what occurred. It is the correction of the meaning you attached to it, and it is meaning, far more than raw event, that shapes the deeper self-concept from which your future circumstances continue to grow. I want to speak, too, of your inner conversation, for it is here, in the private and often unnoticed murmur beneath your conscious thoughts, that the truest evidence of your assumption reveals itself. Listen honestly to what you say to yourself when difficulty arises, in the moments when no one else can hear. Do you rehearse blame? Rehearse the old and familiar complaint that you are somehow singled out for misfortune? Or have you begun, even haltingly, to rehearse a different and quieter conversation, one that meets each difficulty with the settled and unremarkable trust of a river meeting a stone, moving onward without argument, certain of its eventual arrival at the sea? I ask you tonight to become a careful listener to this inner conversation, and whenever you notice it slipping into the old and familiar language of grievance, gently, without force, redirect it toward the language of trust, not because you are pretending the difficulty does not exist, but because you have chosen, deliberately, to interpret it differently, and that choice of interpretation, held persistently, is itself the very seed from which your next season of circumstance will grow. I want you to consider now the changing of seasons once more, because nothing in the natural world illustrates this principle of hidden and unseen good more gently than the long, seemingly barren stretch of winter that precedes every spring. If you had never witnessed a full turning of the year, and someone showed you only the frozen, silent fields of deep winter, you might reasonably conclude that the earth itself had died, that no life remained beneath that hard and unyielding surface. And yet, beneath that very frost, roots continue their quiet work, gathering strength, preparing, in ways entirely invisible to the eye, for the eventual and inevitable burst of green that will one day astonish anyone who had forgotten, during the long winter, that such a thing was even possible. I tell you, whatever season you presently find yourself in, however frozen or difficult it may appear upon the surface, roots are at work, even now, beneath the visible ground of your circumstances, provided you have assumed, with quiet and patient faith, that spring remains not merely possible, but already in truth underway. I want to bring together now everything I have shared with you tonight into a single unified understanding, so that you leave this meditation not with scattered fragments, but with one clear and settled feeling you can carry with you into whatever remains of this day or night. Imagination is the creative power operating within you, and consciousness is the only reality from which every circumstance eventually emerges. Feeling is the secret current beneath your assumption, determining, more than any words you might speak, what your life will become. To assume that everything is working for you is to live already in the end of a story whose final chapter has already resolved into good, regardless of what the present chapter may show. States of consciousness are the many rivers available to you, some leading toward fear, others toward trust, and you are free at any moment to choose which current you allow yourself to be carried by. Revision offers you nightly the chance to correct the meaning you have attached to the day's events, gently reshaping the deeper foundation of your self-concept. Faith is the settled trust in a pattern still weaving, unseen, behind the visible tangle of present circumstance. The state akin to sleep is the sacred hour when this trust sinks deepest, past the vigilant watchman of the analytical mind. Persistence is the patient, repeated choice of the new and less familiar path until it becomes as natural as the old. And your inner conversation, listened to honestly, reveals moment by moment which of these many rivers you are truly allowing yourself to be carried by. I want you now, in these final moments together, to simply rest in the feeling that nothing in your life has ever truly been wasted, that no delay has ever been without purpose, that no closed door has ever been a punishment, but only always a redirection toward a room better suited to your own unfolding good than the one you had originally imagined for yourself. I want you to feel, as fully as you are able, the settled confidence of one who has stopped fighting the current of their own life, and has instead surrendered, not in defeat but in trust, to the quiet and patient river carrying them, even now, toward a sea they cannot yet see but have every reason to believe awaits them, wide and welcoming at the end of every winding turn. Think of the vast and patient sky above you, holding storms and clear mornings alike within its same eternal expanse, never once mistaking a single storm for the permanent character of the whole sky, always trusting, in its own wordless way, that clearing follows storm as surely as morning follows the darkest hour of night. Let your own consciousness rest in this same trust tonight, not because you can yet see the clearing, but because you have decided, quietly and deliberately, to assume its certain arrival. The way the sky itself, if it could speak, would tell you it has never once doubted the sun's return, however long a particular storm may have lingered upon a particular evening. I want you to carry this feeling with you now, beyond these 20 minutes we have spent together, into the ordinary hours of your life that follow. When difficulty arises, and it will arise, for it arises in every life without exception, let your first inner response be, quietly, not what has gone wrong, but what is this working toward? What room is being cleared for me even now? What am I being spared from that I cannot yet perceive? This single shift in your inner conversation, practiced patiently over the coming days and weeks, will do more to reshape your circumstances than any amount of anxious striving ever could, because you will no longer be fighting the river. You will be moving with it, trusting its current, certain of its eventual and faithful arrival at the shore you have, in feeling already claimed as your own. My friends, the world is not happening to you. It is happening through you. Tonight, as you lay your head upon the pillow, dare to assume the feeling of your wish fulfilled. Let the old story fade into silence, and let the new state become your dwelling place. Persist in that feeling, not because you hope it will become true, but because in imagination it is already true. The unseen will become seen, the invisible will become visible, and the state you occupy will become the life you live. Good evening, and may you awaken tomorrow, remembering who you truly are.